Good morning, everyone. We are learning Mishna Bikurim, Parak Beis, Chapter 2, Mishna Test, Mishna 9. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas, Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. So we were introduced yesterday to an animal called a koi. And the previous Mishnah said that in some ways it's similar to a behema, in some ways it's similar to a chaya, in some ways it's similar to both, in some ways it's similar to none. And just to remind ourselves, behema is a domesticated animal, an animal that is typically, raised by people, while a chaya we interpret as a wild animal, an animal that typically is not raised by people. So Mishna Test says, Ketzad Shabel Achai, in what way is a koi similar to a wild animal? So the first thing mentioned is Damai Ta'un Kisei Hadam Chai. Damai Ta'un Kisei Kadam Chaya. Its blood needs covering like the blood of a chaya. There is a mitzvah in the Torah that we call Kisei Hadam, covering the blood, and that is when you perform a shechita, ritual slaughter, on a kosher bird or a kosher chaya, kosher wild animal like a deer, you have to cover its blood with dirt or something similar, even something like ashes. That only applies by a bird and by a chaya, not by a behema, like a cow. So the koi, the Mishnah is saying, its blood has to be covered because for that we consider it like a wild animal. Now, what's important to know is that at the end of the day, the koi is a suffix chaya, suffix behema. We have a question. We're in doubt. What category does it fall under? Does it fall under the category of a chaya or a behema? If so, there is a rule, suffix da'araisa l'chumra. When there is a doubt or a question about a Torah law, we have to be stringent and we have to make sure to do it. So in this case, where there's a question that perhaps the koi is a chaya, and therefore there's a question as to whether we should do the covering of the blood, kisei adam, or not, we say, misafik, out of doubt, you have to go ahead and do the covering of the blood because perhaps it's a chaya, and perhaps it has her obligation of covering the blood. Nonetheless, as the Bartenura adds, typically when you do the mitzvah of kisei adam, like any other mitzvah, you make a bracha, make a blessing before you do the mitzvah. When it comes to making a blessing, that means you're uttering Hashem's name. Now, here, if there's a doubt, which means perhaps that this is not a chaya, it's a behema, and I'm exempt, if I do that, then I'm saying Hashem's name in vain. And therefore, since we have a doubt here, whether I really have to say Hashem's name or not, being that saying Hashem's name in vain is a prohibition, therefore, you have to be strict in that sense, and you don't make the bracha, you don't make the blessing. Okay, so you're going to do the kisei adam, you're going to perform the mitzvah, but you're not going to make the blessing on it. Now, because of this, the Mishnah continues and says, you cannot slaughter a koi on yantif. Now, what that means is like this. Typically, slaughtering is considered malach, a forbidden act on Shabbos. On yantif, you can slaughter an animal, like on Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah. You can slaughter an animal because the rule is that any activity that we need for food preparation, the rule is, and again, there are different, there are different details in this rule, but the starting point of the rule is that what you need for food, you can do on yantif. So therefore, if you need a animal or a fresh animal for your meat on yantif, you can slaughter, you can do shechita on the animal on yantif itself. Now, if you're shechting a deer on yantif, so you're going to shech the animal, you're also going to do kisei adam. You got to cover its blood. What do you cover its blood with? You can't now take dirt, right, from the ground and use it because dirt is muktzah. Muktzah means we have a rabbinic decree that certain objects we may not move on Shabbos or on yantif. Dirt is one of them. So to go ahead and dig up dirt, or to loosen up dirt for the purposes of doing kisei adam on yantif, you're not allowed to do. So how are you going to do kisei adam on yantif? The answer is that you have an oven, and the oven is a wood oven. There are ashes in the oven. I can use ashes to cover the blood. And although typically ashes are also muktzah because they really have no use, for yantif we say that the owner of these ashes has in mind that these ashes should be used to slaughter an animal that he needs to eat on Yontif. So if you're going to go ahead and do kisei hadam on Yontif, you're going to do it with ashes from your oven. Now the Mishnah says regarding the koi, the ain sheikh Yontif. You cannot slaughter it on Yontif. Why? The answer is because when it comes to a koi, I'm not going to be able to do the kisei hadam. If I slaughter the animal, then I have the mitzvah of kisei hadam. But I'm not going to be able to do the kisei hadam because what am I going to do it with? Can't do it with dirt. In regard to a koi, the Talmud says you can't use the ashes either, because when a person has in mind that his ashes are going to be used to cover blood of an animal that he slaughters, he only has it in mind for an animal that for sure has the mitzvah, that for sure I have to do the covering for, which is like a deer, a chaya. But the koi here is a suffix, it's a doubt. In case it's an animal, in case it's a behemoth, then it doesn't eat kisei hadam. So we say that a person's mindset, that the ashes should be usable on Yontif to cover blood, is only where you have to cover the blood, where you definitely have to cover the blood. He doesn't have that in mind for something that's doubtful, whether it needs the covering of the blood or not. Therefore, it comes out that you really don't have what to do kisei hadam with on Yontif if you slaughter a koi. And therefore we say, you cannot let a shechted on Yontif. If you cannot shecht an animal and put yourself in a situation where I won't be able to do the mitzvah of kisei hadam that follows. You can't put yourself in that kind of situation. And therefore the Mishnah says, you cannot shecht the koi on Yontif. The im shchatai. And let's say you did. You weren't supposed to, you weren't allowed to, but you did. Ein mechasen as dama. You're not going to cover the blood. You can't do it. In this sense, the koi, the starting words of the Mishnah was, in what way is a koi similar to a chaya? And the answer that we start, the first example was that you perform kisei hadam. Now, what we're talking about not slaughtering the koi on Yontif is really a way that it's not similar to a chaya, because a chaya I could slaughter it and cover its blood. But once we mentioned the fact that there's a similarity between koi and a chaya regarding covering the blood, the Mishnah wanted to add, once we're discussing that subject of kisei hadam, that at the end there will be a difference because of kisei hadam between a koi and a definite chaya like a deer. We wanted to bring that out here at this point, since we're comparing them regarding kisei hadam. We wanted to bring out where there is a difference in them regarding kisei hadam, which makes a difference, or there's because of even though they share kisei hadam, there is still a difference because of kisei hadam when it comes to slaughtering a chaya, or when it comes to slaughtering a koi on Yontif. Okay, that's the first thing. The next thing the Mishnah mentions is the chalbai metame b'tumas nevela kachaya. The fat of a koi will make something impure with the impurity of a animal that died without slaughtering, like a chaya. That means like this. There is something called chaylev. Chaylev is specifically the layer of heart fat that surrounds the stomachs, the loins, and kidneys. Now, this fat, if let's say that fat, okay, next term, nevela. Nevela is a term that we use for an animal that died without shechita. I mean, a kosher animal that dies without shechita, it's called a nevela. And it actually is a source of impurity, of tuma, of what we call ritual impurity. The halacha is like this. So the flesh of the nevela, for sure, can make something else impure. The fat, it depends. If we're talking about a behemoth, a domesticated animal, we have scriptural sources that teach us that the fat of a behemoth that became a nevela, died without shechita, does not convey tuma. The fat of a chaya that died without shechita does convey tuma, just as its flesh does. Now, let's get to the koi. The koi is a suffix. Is it a chaya or is it a behemoth? Does its fat, if let's say the koi dies without shechita, and you have its chaylev, its fat, will it convey tuma like its flesh? And the answer is, practically speaking, we will treat it that way. The chelbay metame ketumas nevela kachaya. Its fat, its chaylev, can convey tuma impurity, like the tuma of a animal that died without shechita, as a chayas fat does. The Tumasa b'safek, but the Mishnah adds, but its Tuma is really a doubt. Since the Kaya is a doubt, maybe it's a Chaya, so therefore maybe its fat conveys Tuma, and I have to treat it as a maybe, which means there will be times that I will be strict and say that if the chaylev of the dead Koi, if the Koi that's an Avela, if it comes to contact something, I will treat it like something that's impure. But for some other laws, I won't necessarily do that. The example that would apply to this is if, let's say, the fat of the koi that was in avela touched truma. Okay, it touched truma, the truma that's eaten by, that's specially separated and only can be eaten by a kohen. Truma that becomes tamei, that came into contact with tuma, it becomes tamei. Kohen's not allowed to eat it. Now, if it is for sure tamei, came into a unquestionable source of tuma, then the halacha is that truma is going to be burned. If it only came into contact with safek tuma, doubtful tuma, so the kohen can't eat it, but I can't burn it because I'm not allowed to burn truma. In case the truth, this really is tar, it's pure, because a kohen is a behema, and therefore the fat of a kohen that's an avela does not transmit tuma, then the truma is fine, and I'm not allowed to burn it then. So in this case, there will be, I will take the truma. The truma will be treated like it's tamei when it came into contact with the chaylev of the kohen that's an avela. The kohen may not eat it, but I can't burn it either. I just have to let it rot. So that's the second example of how a kohen will be like a chaya. And again, we say that it's like a chaya in the sense that it's fat, it's chaylev, will convey tumas of an avela, but we also add the tumas a suffix. It's a doubt. It's not 100% like a chaya. The ain't paid by petach hamar, and you cannot use a kai to redeem the firstborn animal of a donkey. The halacha is if the firstborn or the first animal that opens the womb of its mother is a male, it has to be redeemed. It has to be redeemed with something that's called sheep, which would either be a goat or it would be sheep. You go and you exchange it for that, and then the sanctity goes from the firstborn donkey onto the lamb. Now, but again, it has to be a set. That's the word that's used. Set. You redeem it with a set. Right. You redeem it by giving a sheep or goat to a kohen. Give a sheep or a goat to a kohen, and then the donkey its sanctity is often. And it's usable as is. You can use it whatever you want. Now, or bottom line is, there is this mitzvah to redeem it. There's a mitzvah to redeem it from whatever sanctity that it has. Now, you want to know, can I use a kai to redeem the firstborn donkey? Well, if it's a chaya, you can't. If it's a behemoth, if it is, then we actually would treat it like a goat, because if anything, or actually like a sheep. I'm sure. It was a goat we said before. Yeah, it's a cross between a goat and a deer, or an independent species that bears similarities to goats. So if we consider a behemoth, if we can consider it a domesticated animal, that means we'll consider it a goat. If it's a goat, you can use it to redeem the firstborn donkey. But we have a subject, we have a doubt. Can you or can't you? Therefore, we say that you cannot use it to redeem this firstborn donkey. Okay, we continue with the laws of Rechilas the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Test, chapter 9. We're up to paragraph Yud Gimel. Now, we've been talking about the person who he bought something, he was cheated, and you are going to tell him about it because, or actually you're telling him that he was cheated after he purchased it. And we're talking about a situation where he has a right now to try to get back his money. So the Chavetz Chaim mentioned that you can go ahead and tell him, but yeah, there are conditions that have to be met. Now, Yud Gimel, this is a continuation. Calls Edi Barnu, everything we have spoken up until now. If if he recognizes the person who got cheated, he recognizes the nature of the person who got cheated. Then when he knows that he got cheated, he will not do anything on his own. He will take him to the rabbinical court and make a claim against him according to the laws of the Torah. So you're telling this person after the fact that he purchased it, that he was cheated. He has the right to do something about it, and he'll do it right. That means he'll go through a beis din, a rabbinical court. So then you got to make sure that the other conditions are met. You got to make sure not to exaggerate. Your intention has to be for a constructive purpose. You got to know he's going to do something with this in a constructive way. If there's a way you can avoid having to tell him about this, but to solve the problem, you should do that. Those were the conditions mentioned before. But if you recognize this person's nature, that once you tell him he was cheated, he's going to go and do things on his own, which he's not allowed to do that. He will basically grab something of his, meaning of the person who cheated him. We're just going to give him back the merchandise, not going to pay for it. Or let's say he partially paid, now he's got to pay the rest. He won't do it. And he's doing this without going through rabbinical court. Then you got to be careful what you say to him. Because in order to avoid the prohibition of speaking or saying something wrong, another three conditions have to be met. Meaning, this person is going to act on his own and take the law into his own hands. He's not allowed to do that. Now, if you go ahead and you tell someone how someone else cheated him, and based on that, he goes and does something against that person that in a wrong manner, you spoke rechilas. The same way, if you speak rechilas about someone, to say someone did this to you and he gets upset and he gets angry about it, which is the problem with rechilas, because by telling this person what someone else did to him, he now has something against that person. Well, if he acts against that person, that's even more. So you spoke rechilas. Now, Chavetz Chaim says, if you want to avoid the technical prohibition of rechilas in doing so, meaning in telling such a person who's going to take the law into his own hands, if you want to avoid, technically, so to speak, the prohibition of rechilas by telling him the information, you need three more conditions besides for the conditions mentioned before. You yourself have to know that he was cheated. You recognize it yourself. But if somebody else tells you he got cheated, you have no idea. But if somebody else tells you, you can't say it over to him. Okay? You can't just basically, if he would take things into his own hands, it would seem like if others tell you that you got cheated, he should know because he can go ahead and act upon that in a right way. But here, he's not going to act rightfully. He's going to take things into his hands. He can't do that if you don't know that for sure. Or it would be rechilas if you wouldn't know that for sure, that he got cheated. 2, shiu masap mishnayim. Those who know and are telling him have to be 2. Gimel, 3, that no damage should come to the cheater by what they related to this person, more than what would happen were this to be happening through a beis din. But if they recognize the nature of the person who got cheated, that he's going to do more than what the law allows to happen to the person who cheated him, and he won't follow the law when it comes to dealing with the person who cheated him, you're not allowed to reveal to him anything. Meaning, if you want to make sure that you did not transgress rechilas because this person heard what you said and acted upon it, there has to be that, number 1, you know that the person got cheated. Number 2, it's not just one person, it's got to be 2. If it's 2, then what you're saying, if it had been said in a rabbinical court, then what happens to the cheater would be happening according to what the law would be. The problem here is, as we're going to talk about again, is that this person is not going to beis din, but were he to go to beis din, and he's basing what, if we were to go to beis din, and he has your two people testifying that he got cheated, then that would mean that he'd have a right to demand payment or demand his money back. So he's not going to Beis Din here, but if he's basing it on what two people say, and what those two people say, if it would have been a Beis Din, would have given him the right to do to this cheater what he's doing on his own right now, then those two people did not transgress rechilas. However, if what happens is that what this guy who got cheated does to the cheater on his own is more than what a Beis Din would allow him to do based on what these two people have said, those two people can't tell it. If those two people would now tell him he got cheated, and because of that he acts and goes beyond what the law would even allow him to do, forget about the fact that he's not even going through a Beis Din. Even in Beis Din, he wouldn't be allowed to do that. If you give me this information, that's rechilas. Now, we're going to stop here today, continue tomorrow. But as what's going to be pointed out, as has been previously pointed out in a different situation, the Chavetz Chaim brought, this is a technicality in the sense that, have you transgressed rechilas, the Torah prohibition of rechilas? No, if you meet these conditions. Have you given aid to a person who is acting wrongfully? Yes, you are. And that alone would say they're not allowed to say any of this. So in a sense, the discussion here is really, technical, or call it academic, in the sense like these people, have they transgressed the prohibition of the Torah of rechilas, which is a serious thing? The answer is, if all the conditions before are met, they haven't. But are they really allowed to say this to the person? At the end of the day, it's going to be no. Because if based on what they say, he acts wrongfully, they are supporting wrongful acts, and they're not allowed to do that. Have a wonderful day.